Hello and welcome to this Veeam Live webcast. I'm Pete Rawdon, Alliance Manager at Veeam, and today we're going to be discussing reducing business cost and creating competitive edge through the management and protection of data in today's hybrid cloud, multi-cloud world. I've got a fantastic panel to join me in this discussion, and I'd like to start by them introducing themselves.
Hi, Pete. I'm Grant Cayley, the Chief Technologist for NetApp in the UK and Ireland.
Welcome, Grant.
Okay.
Hi, Pete. I'm Scott King. I'm a cloud architect focusing around hybrid IT based in the Netherlands, working for NTT.
Welcome, Scott.
Thanks.
Hi, Pete. Working for Veeam as an Alliance Systems Engineer covering EMEA with a good focus on NetApp.
Great to have you here, Kevin.
Thank you.
So data is at the core of most organisations increasingly. I'd like to start by asking you to give your perspective of the value of data to organisations. Can I start with you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, we've seen a transformation in business over the last few years, digital transformation, if you want to call it that. But really what we're starting to see is the combination of data and technology being able to provide companies with real innovation capabilities and value. And there's a lot of innovative disruption that we've seen in many traditional markets to date. I don't want to quote the often quoted Ubers and Airbnbs, but what they did was they took data and applied it to their business model. So really data for these companies has become the absolute prime asset, if you like, to the point of fact that now they're really trying to take advantage of that and to innovate quite successfully with it. And those that do get a real advantage in the world,
That's great. Scott?
Yeah, well, I totally agree with everything you just said. I think one perspective that I was in a workshop just last week, and a customer said, data is the new gold. And we had a whole discussion about what does that mean. Gold intrinsically when it's in the ground, it has no value. And when you take it out of the ground, it also has, some value. But it really has value when you mint it into a coin, or you fashion it into jewelry, or you use it as a conductor. Then it has value. And in the same way, you could look at data as being something you have to mine. You have to collect it and look for insights, and you have to apply that in a good way to get the value out of the data. So data is what's driving all the transformation of business, what you're talking about, and is a key asset for companies that they need to protect and they need to leverage.
That's a great analogy. I think data is the new gold. Kevin, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Grant and Scott have just said. The true value of data is to be able to mine it. But to be able to mine it, obviously it has to be available. So bringing data together increases its value. And I think more and more organisations today are recognising the fact that bringing all the data together and pooling that data is really driving additional value. And as Grant mentioned, the use of the data by the Ubers and such, they would not be where they are today without being able to analyse and mine that data. And of course, to do that, as I will always refer back to, it has to be available.
Okay, yeah, good point. So I think we're all agreeing that data is valuable. What challenges do you believe customers are facing when they're looking at managing and protecting their data? Can I start with you again, Grant?
So I think the challenges are actually, quite widespread, to be honest, because if you think about how customers use data in their data centers in the last 40 years, they built many decades of enterprise protection around about how they provided for data, how they managed it, how they protected for that data. And the real challenge now is that as customers look towards the hybrid cloud and a multi-cloud model, they're now putting data into a whole range of new locations which they hadn't put that data into before. So we see, data being deployed in IaaS applications, we see it being deployed in PaaS, in serverless computing, in SaaS applications, as well as what's still on-premise. And now the challenge, I think, for customers is really about not forgetting that they still have to cope with managing that data, with protecting that data, with making it available when and where it's needed. And that challenge is now, instead of just being in the data center, it's now almost quadrupled in the sense it's sitting in all of these new environments. So from an IT perspective, it's really become a huge challenge in how customers actually start to look at that and how they think about solving some of these conundrums.
Okay.
Yeah, this is one of the let's say the preconceived notions, the wrong assumptions about the cloud is that if you bring it to a Microsoft or an AWS and it's going to be secure, you're still responsible for protecting and managing your own data. You can't rely on the cloud provider to do that for you.
Yeah.
And so and exactly what you said, it's being differentiated now. You're having 20, 30 places where your data is stored. How do you get visibility over that data? How do you control it? How do you make sure it's accessible, what you say, and findable, and that you can apply these insights, which can only be gained by bringing the data sources together.
Yeah, and I think people think the cloud is a magic bucket that you just throw data into and it automatically delivers what you need it to do, which it does to some degree.
Sometimes,
but equally, there's a responsibility that goes with placing it there, and I think that's the challenge which companies have.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And in the software as a service model, as you were talking about there, Scott, it is the provider of the service that is responsible for the availability of that service, availability of the solution. But it is quite a surprise, as you mentioned, to some users of software as a service, that the data owner is the customer, is the end user, and they really do need to be mindful of how they protect it and being able to make potentially multiple copies. Bringing it back centrally, as I mentioned earlier, about bringing data into a central location to be able to mine it and deliver more value from that data. So you spoke about data being in cloud, in SaaS, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service. We also see in the hybrid model fully back on-prem. We see legacy hardware. So it's from many locations, and that really produces quite a complex protection model and a management model. And there are certain things that we can do to help there, but it is quite a wide scope of area of where that data can actually be held, but the ownership is at the end is the customer's responsibility, and the management and the value that they could drive from that is absolutely the customer's responsibility.
Or the poor IT department that
Or the
actually
poor
are
IT
actually the
department.
ones who have
Yes.
got to deal with the daily, kind of management of that, I suppose.
Indeed.
I have one other dimension, which is came a little bit unexpected to me during a workshop where my customer said they're being responsible for providing data as a service to other companies and to citizens. And so they are having, it's not just giving away the data, you actually have to curate the data and make sure it's being used in the effective way by third parties, making sure that there are adequate controls when it's used by third parties. And so it's even breaching the normal borders of what a company is. And it's even creating an additional challenge.
I like that term, data as a service, because it takes another dimension to what the value of the data is. It's actually got its own value in its own right without all the infrastructure and applications that are hosted normally around data.
Yes.
And I think that's, we've seen some good uses of that. I mean, we see in the UK, we have something called Open Government, where they publish a lot of their data sets for free onto the web, and then people can just use them for data mining for whatever purpose. So you can find out your rubbish collection days and, and all of that information standardized. But equally, they can go the other way as well. When I won't mention company names, but we've seen some kind of outages of incorrect use of data sets. But I think that's the way it's got to go. Data is the core component, if you like, of the innovation that companies are trying to drive. And I like the idea of it as being as a service. But what that kind of leads back to, ourselves, Veeam and NetApp, and NTT, I'm sure as well, in terms of your architectural designs, is that we still have to think about how we provide the protection that sits around that, the availability of it, the mobility of data. All of these are big challenges to solve.
Yeah, not just the availability, also the location. If we look at GDPR, for instance, knowing where the data is, whether it be a production data set or a backup data set that's been protected, being able to tag its location and understand where it's going, where it's sat, and not allowing it to breach any boundaries that it shouldn't be transiting.
And to be able to show that and prove it in a compliance report that we've been in control of our data, we knew where it was at all times, we had effective measures in place.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm hearing diversity, I'm hearing distribution of data, I'm hearing the importance to get it to the right place at the right time. Anything else facing organisations from a challenge perspective?
I think one thing you could say is that the whole move to the multi-cloud is stretching IT organizations quite substantially. Not maybe it's beyond just the data part, but it's also adapting new automation technologies or utilizing all these different cloud services and how they interact together requires often a different skill set than what a traditional IT organization has. And so you have a lot of enablement and alignment that's required in order to change people's skill sets and capabilities to be able to think and manage these new IT operating models?
I think it's quite important as well that once you move a service to a particular location, that you have the freedom to move it elsewhere. So I think not restricting that mobility piece. So having the ability to move a service from one cloud to another cloud, back on-prem, back to the cloud, to have that where it fits best for the service is really quite key. And I don't think a lot of organisations really have that flexibility today. So being able to have that flexibility and mobility and portability around data sets and applications, I think is a challenge that people have today.
If you have that solved, then you also can avoid the vendor lock-in
Indeed.
issue, so
Yes.
that you have an exit strategy when you can know your data can be easily moved to another cloud.
Yeah, I mean that's core. I think from what we see with NetApp and is to try and create this kind of idea of an operational normalized landscape across the hybrid cloud, so that where IT chooses to deliver services is really almost can be a cost differentiator, or maybe it's a resource or a regulation requirement that forces it. But the point is that shouldn't really make a difference. It should have all the technology underpinning it to be able to make that transparent and to make mobility happen across those. We were talking about it earlier during the break before, but it's really around about IT becoming the broker of IT services, such that the business just says, I want to do this. They adapt. They say, OK, here's the service. But it's not necessarily in our data center. It could equally be in Google or Amazon or Azure, for example. That should just be a transparent capability as far as what IT delivers for the business, I guess.
Yeah.
And there should also be a wrap of protection around all all those services that are above in that broker layer. The automatic protection of that data is something that needs to be involved at that layer.
Yeah, so getting the data at the right place at the right time, and also coping with increasing and different demands from the business, I'm also hearing. So moving on, these challenges, what can your organisations do to help customers face and overcome some of these challenges? Kevin, would you like to start?
Yes. So from a protection point of view, with the Veeam product portfolio, we have the ability to protect pretty much any workload anywhere. So that makes us to have the ability to protect those workloads in the cloud, whether it be in Azure, whether it be in AWS, whether it be in a hosted private cloud, so more infrastructure as a service, on-prem. And that on-prem could be a cloud-like architecture, or it could be that legacy physical architecture. With Veeam Backup and Replication, we have the ability to protect all those different types of workload, even software as a service models as well. But the key with Veeam is you can protect all those different data sets and bring those back to a central location. And then you can add additional services. You can drive value from that data set that you've created centrally. You can make multiple copies of that data, keeping you in compliance. But driving the value of that captured data set is really quite key. And that's something we can do with our data lab services, giving you the ability to maybe spin up workloads from backup, maybe from NetApp snapshots as well, for a non-persistent dev test troubleshooting like environment. And doing that from NetApp snapshots gives you a very high performant test and dev environment as well. That then goes along with some of our compliant features around recovery. So we can perform different types of recovery, allowing us to adhere to GDPR rules. So if we were needing to perform a restore from an old data set that perhaps has some data in that shouldn't come back into production, we have features for that as well. So with Veeam, you can protect pretty much any workload anywhere, but then you can allow mobility here as well. So you have the ability, once you've captured a data set and you've centralized that, you can perform recovery anywhere from that data set.
That's great. Thanks, Kevin. Grant, how does that dovetail with NetApp's approach?
Yeah, I mean, really nicely, to be honest. And that's been the great complementary factors of the Veeam and NetApp relationship. NetApp are really about creating this kind of normalized data management landscape across a range of endpoints. And those endpoints are what the customers deploy their data onto. So in the data center, it's hardware NAS and SAN devices, software-defined versions of those. But equally, we can now deliver those same capabilities across private cloud infrastructure with HCI, or even in the public clouds with our Cloud Volume Service and Cloud Volumes ONTAP. But all those endpoints really just create a kind of a landscape that with the customer data on, we can then connect those landscapes together and bring an element of normalization around about security, around about replication of data for disaster recovery, integrating into the Veeam products for enhanced backup management, clone management, and really just provide, because the trouble with the hybrid cloud is that every time you deploy something, you're creating a silo of complexity. And if you do that, you're just going to run out of cost and it's going to be very expensive. So by creating a normalized landscape and bringing the data management in that kind of consistent manner, we really reduce the cost for customers and ultimately the complexity. And delivering that means that they can be much more focused on agility in the business outcome rather than the actual technical aspects of how they actually deliver the data and the services to the applications which they're looking to drive. So I think they're very complementary, the two capabilities from Veeam and NetApp in terms of making the data available and then providing the protection on top of that. You don't obfuscate the need to protect your data just because you put it into the cloud. As Kevin very much mentioned, you actually have an enhanced requirement to protect it. Yeah. And that's where you need to pay much more attention to it. So.
And Scott, would you share the integrator's perspective?
Yeah. We come from a slightly different perspective. So Entity is a reseller and a system integrator for technology, including NetApp and Veeam. So we work very closely together with you guys for our customers. But we approach it maybe a little bit different because our first step is we want to understand what the customer's needs are, where they're coming from, what their ambitions are, where they want to go. So inevitably, it begins with consulting. And that's one of where I'm often involved is looking at this new governance, this new operating model. How are we going to best serve the business? The key strategy for Entity is around intelligent infrastructures, intelligent workplaces, intelligent business. So it's taking things like software defined and automation. And tying into these smart technologies to create intelligent ways of working. Let's put it that way, across the whole spectrum. So I think we are trusted advisors to our customers to help them understand and evaluate how solutions like Veeam and NetApp can be best applied, not just in the on-premise world, but in the multi-cloud world.
Yeah, and I think that's really important actually because. As technology vendors, although we're looking up into the business and trying to solve business challenges, we're not looking strictly across the range of technologies which sit not necessarily adjacent to us, but sit outside of that adjacency. And I think that's where integrators are really important in terms of what you do because you have that higher level view of the customer's challenge that brings those components together.
Yeah, that's right. I think another area that we so customers when they want to adapt these multi-cloud architectures, they have, at the most simple level, they have a choice. They could either do it themselves, which is what we help them do every day. We help them pick and implement the right types of technologies. We can consult with them of how to transform their organizations. We can help them build automation scripts so that they can automate the deployment and management of their infrastructures. Or we could provide a managed service. And so that's very often what we do for those customers that want to leapfrog and immediately move to a higher level of intelligent business or intelligent infrastructures. You can buy that from us as a service. So and that knowledge that we get out of that managed service actually helps us improve our consultancy and technical services for other people. We have a fully integrated Veeam and NetApp solution as part of our managed hybrid IT solution, for example.
So you're almost solving some of the challenges before customers realize they have the challenges, I suppose, which is a lot of benefit. So.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
As customers look to build out these hybrid cloud models, what other considerations should they take into account based on your experiences engaging with customers?
Well, from my point of view, from a sort of Veeam protection point of view, is certainly consider protecting the data at the start of any design or the start of any service that they're wanting to use. I see a lot of instances in the industry where a service is rolled out or they adopt a hybrid cloud model on-prem and all those mixed workloads, and then after the fact they think maybe we should protect all this. Thinking about this at the start of any solution, at the start of any service is very important. Allowing Veeam to be able to be integrated into that solution and be able to provide that best level of protection with the best design. Rather than backup, well, data protection being an afterthought, it needs to be part of the intrinsic design of any service or deployment. I think that's quite key, especially in the integrator's sense of things.
So one of the things we talked about earlier as well, we've seen, this is nothing new when we talk about DevOps and the way in which companies are using Agile to develop new ways to transform their businesses and everything. So the thing that we see more and more is secure by design. So what you want to let your developers have freedom to, develop and build and be fast and adapt to the business. But at the same time, you want to make sure that the boundaries are defined. And so, for example, making sure that the security is built in, making sure that you're always using these data fabrics and platforms that are ensuring the data compliance and availability are key. At the same time, providing flexibility. So the challenge is how do you build those secure by design capabilities and give flexibility while at the same time keeping in control?
Yeah. I very much like these secure by design, but they're projected as by design and available by design. That just works perfectly across. If that could be implemented across every solution and service, I think it would be a nicer place for those end users of consuming those services.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when customers look out to move into the hybrid cloud. I think they often have to your point, protection by design, if we want to call it that, which is a good way of doing it, has to be at the forefront, because moving into the cloud offers a range of services, and the cloud is really given as a durable environment, meaning they won't lose your data, but there's not a service level around about backup, recovery, about synchronously mirroring or replication of your data. You have to build all those capabilities yourself in the cloud, and that's where NetApp has spent a lot of time, is really to bring technological layers, particularly around about HA in the cloud, about bringing service levels around about performance. But actually the other factor as well as you move into the cloud is actually looking at the cost, because let's face it, the cloud is a rental model. It has a cost associated. So bringing technologies in there that reduce the cost of storing data is one of the important parts. But to your point, I think automation across the whole piece has to be absolutely key, because we've developed IT over the last 20, 30 years without really considering automation as a way of delivering it. And now I think that has to be one of the first things that binds it, because to do that means you can then roll in standards for security, for how you define, ring fence and sandbox environments, etc. So I think people don't tend to think in that model. Although they automate components, they really need to think about the bigger picture about how that builds into maybe a DevOps process or a CI/CD process, and actually bringing automation into every step to really accelerate that kind of, not just the agility, but enhance the security and the protection of what they actually do. So
correct.
Yeah, really important.
So just give you a customer example. One of our customers had a very extensive AWS environment, which was built up by multiple third-party developers that they'd hired in, and they ended up having about 18 or 20 different AWS environments. But all of them were built differently, different naming. Some were using, one technology and the other one another technology. And what we helped them to do was to say, all right, let's rethink about how you want to use the cloud, and let's define a set of secure templates and deployment scripts which will define how you roll out new projects and environments in the future. As we built that up in a CI/CD pipeline and created a process so that the internal DevOps teams, rather than just deploying their own stuff, they choose standardized templates and scripts, and within that domain they're free, but they can't go beyond it, and they can't deploy stuff without it being scripted. And so this is a way of using automation also as a way to, let's say, lock down the environments and keep you from doing or things being deployed that you're not in control of.
Yeah, but again, it brings a freedom as well to some degree, because IT, if we think of that as the body underneath, if you like, they then have the flexibility to modify the automation so that it delivers the services in a different cloud or a different environment, on-premise maybe, on an HCI solution. But that is all transparent to the layers that sit above, and it's that API layer, I suppose, which almost separates the the two components so that the DevOps CI/CD see a normalized landscape. They don't see things changing. But in reality, IT are able to deliver the services how and they decide in that ring fence kind of
capability. Absolutely true.
Yeah.
That's maybe, by the way, to some extent, it's so you use a Veeam backup in order to ensure availability of your systems and the data.
Yes.
But in an automated way, you can also just redeploy your virtual machine from the script, and to that extent, maybe less reliant on the backup.
Yeah, it depends.
You still need the data.
Of course.
Yeah.
It depends on the nature of the workload. If the workload needs attaching to the data set, then of course we need to make that data set available. If it's a completely transient object, storing no data, then yes, a redeployment might be quicker than maybe a Veeam replication failover. So, I mean, deployment today from fast storage, scripted,
there are more options available. That's something for sure.
Yeah, it's so fast. But I think being able to blend the use of could be considered a more traditional recovery with data and a redeployment of a workload reattaching to data. I think it's best to have both of those and blend the use of those together for the specific use case.
Agree.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good thing because maximizing, I mean, data in the cloud has gravity, we call it. It has a weight to it, and that weight is cost and effort to move it, if you like. So if you're going to back up and have backups of data, you may as well make maximum use of them for other things other than just a backup. You may as well use them for being able to use these sandbox environments to create, instances and bring them back up and do testing or whatever else you want to do. And I think that's where the technologies really come together, leveraging the kind of inbuilt snapshot capabilities that we offer at the kind of the storage data layer, if you like, and then integrating them into the Veeam suite in terms of what you can do there.
I mean, there's a particular use case in the UK. We had a customer that had a very large number of apps within a particular environment, upwards of north of 10,000 applications within the environment. And they had deployed test, dev, UAT environments for every single application. Obviously, the dev team wasn't so large, so they certainly couldn't be testing and performing any DevOps type operations on all of those applications at the same time. So being able to leverage data labs of being able to spin up those protected environments ad hoc was a particularly great value to them. But the key to the performance of this is spinning them up from NetApp snapshots, not spinning them up from backups. So as we like to blend the use of recovering and maybe redeploying, blend the use of snapshots and backups together to provide that great level of service. Spinning up those dev test environments from NetApp snapshots are going to give the IT department, the consumer of the service, near production level like performance, delivering greater value from the data set as that's what we're trying to do here. Yeah. And I think that's a particularly strong message. And this particular end user was planning to almost cut that dev environment that was permanently deployed by about 60%, saving 60% on hardware, cooling, and power, really quite a considerable saving in that data suite, that data center that they had.
Yeah. That's a fantastic example and really helps move on to the next topic, which I think is really business impact. I saw a recent survey, and I've got to read this, a recent ESG survey that found only 6% of business leaders believe their internal IT organisations provide them with competitive edge. And that really puts the IT area, IT department, under the cosh. How do we enable with our solutions and services the shift of focus from managing IT, keeping the lights on, and moving it to helping create competitive edge for the business? That was a great example you just gave, Kevin. Yeah. Do we have others?
Yeah, I mean, so we have a customer called Reach in the UK, who they publish the Daily Express and about 250 other regional newspapers. And their challenge as moving towards being a digital business was how do they leverage the cloud in terms of making them more agile. And part of that was realizing that actually their IT function in itself, they wanted to go from on-premise traditional infrastructure to moving part of that, the DR initially, into the cloud. so that they could then firstly take advantage of testing the cloud with what was considered their ancillary kind of workloads, their secondary workloads. But then once they'd done that, they then decided to then move their production into the cloud as well. But the only reason they could achieve that agility was by a layer of NetApp sitting underneath what they did in the cloud to help them reduce the cost, to increase the functionality, and to really provide a lot of cost, benefits to them. But I think that's the challenge that that businesses have in looking at their IT department, is they do see them as taking too long to deliver services. They see that as a real challenge to their innovation curve of getting towards growth and innovation. And that's where IT needs to be really kind of take that shift of adopting cloud, becoming, as I mentioned earlier, the kind of broker of IT services. So the business that says, I need to do X, IT then takes care of delivering that, maybe on premise if that works quickly or cost effectively, but equally in the cloud. And we really, as in terms of what NetApp do anyway, we try and build the options so that at least the underpinning kind of data fabric, as we call it, facilitates that. It doesn't become you have to go on premise because that's the only way we can do this. That shouldn't be the case nowadays. And I think it's up to technology as an enabler to really provide that for companies, to give them the flexibility. I was talking to a company, a large bank actually, who were at the DevOps point, and they were thinking, how do we get into DevOps? And firstly, they decided to segment that legacy on-premise development and now DevOps development, which is cloud-based. But I said to them, what tools do your developers use? And he just said, what tools do they not use? And the point of it was, they can't restrict them, because to do that would force an answer and restrict the innovation which they could get. So they have to provide an environment which lets them use anything. But back to your point, it's certainly kind of ring-fenced a little bit. It has to be controlled, but IT has to make sure the boundaries are now wide enough that that control spans across multiple clouds and on-premise as well, to really open up the possibilities, I think, there.
So really building out the flexibility to help the organisations meet the different and increasing demands that are made on it by the business.
Yeah, but not forgetting enterprise and the data protection and everything else which goes in, because that's where the dangers can come if you don't, if you're not cognizant of remembering about those things when you go to the cloud.
Yeah.
But what you say is so typical. I mean, most IT organizations got maybe surprised a bit by the cloud. I'm talking maybe 3-4 years ago, 5 years ago, depending. Things are just so quicker and faster in the cloud. And if you're comparing that to a traditional IT organization, which is still deploying VMs manually and taking a lot of time, then it doesn't deliver the speed of the business. So then the business might be saying, we're not competitive enough. So I think a huge challenge is how to enable that innovative capacity to support DevOps teams, to explore new lines of business while still keeping the lights on, because all that legacy still needs to keep running 24/7, and availability needs to be there. And until the very last day that server is on, you have to make sure it's protected and not open to breaches.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's interesting fact actually that I can't remember who it was. I think it was Gartner who said that something like in budget terms, 70% is still spent on premise keeping the lights on. I think 20% goes into growth applications and building new growth, and 10% is left for innovation. And unless companies can change that ratio, they're never going to be ahead of the curve. They're always going to be behind the curve. And I think that's where the cloud really opens up the possibilities, providing you put in the data management capabilities around it, because if you don't, then it ends up, or could end up, being an expensive mistake. Yes. There are as many, I think IDC reported early on that as many people going into the cloud as were coming back out. But that's really preparation and capability, I think. Yeah, it's a different case nowadays, very much. Yeah, very interesting.
But we see that a lot across our customers. Just moving workloads to the cloud is not the answer. Re-architecture and rethinking those application estates is really key. And hence why people are moving back out of the cloud when they possibly just almost change location by lifting and shifting an application from on-prem to the cloud. It's not necessarily the answer.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you're just moving your garbage to the cloud to maybe save a buck on some storage, but in the end you're creating a new legacy in the cloud.
Yeah, and you've got to be careful as well of cloud lock-in, which is a challenge for some companies, being able to make sure that they can adapt and adopt, rather, the cloud, but not lock themselves in and create another silo, which in 30 years they wish they hadn't gone down that route. And being able to create that landscape where you've got the ability to move your applications and data, not at will necessarily, and maybe one day with containerization that will be the case, but certainly today there's still a bit of effort involved in shifting services around. But you have to keep your options open, I think, because One day Google might be very much cheaper than Azure, who may offer a new service on AI capabilities that you want to adapt. You have to have that kind of hybrid multi-cloud world that you can adapt to, and make sure that you, from our perspective, make sure the data is available there to be used, but then equally layering Veeam on top, make sure you can protect it once it does arrive in these environments. So.
Yeah. Once you've protected it with Veeam in those cloud architectures, it is possible to assist, Veeam can assist with moving between those different cloud providers and back on-prem if required, if we've managed to protect that data set in our whole mobility piece.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I like about Veeam is that, NetApp, we deliver private cloud HCI, we deliver on-premise traditional infrastructures, we deliver cloud environments, and you can protect the lot, and provide value on top of that. And that's just really where I think a lot of the synergy from a technology perspective comes together. Mm-hmm.
And then I think also together we have a story around turning the data to be a differentiator, a competitive tool with things like analytics and data labs and that type of thing. Is that's also an area where we deliver business value to the customer?
Well, I think that's really where we start to really leverage the data and drive value from it. Using those data labs, spinning up those labs to be able to be used specifically from NetApp storage as near production-like environments. That really is, backup data traditionally it was more like an insurance policy. It was something that was just there for in case something went horribly wrong. But being able to use things like data labs really truly delivers value from that data set. You could, if you're wanting to do some investigation, some analytics into what the data looked like 3 weeks ago, a month ago, very easy to do that from snapshots or backups within data labs. Really giving you that insight, allowing you to maybe create some trending data to understand what's going forward, what we're going to be seeing in the future. And that's with the wrap of Veeam and the NetApp data fabric, it's really quite a valuable combination of features and functionality, I think, which we can drive great value from the data set.
Yeah, and it really does work because, all of that capability requires management, and the NetApp snapshots provide the kind of the zero space, cost efficient, but high performance in terms of creating and tearing down. So the two flexible options together give customers a real advantage in terms of being able to, create sandbox environments, to try things out, to do additional data mining analytics without incurring cost and time as a factor that stops them from doing that. And I think that's really where, when we talk about innovation and IT delivering, I think that's where it makes a massive difference for customers.
We talked about this earlier today as well. We had this big customer that does multiple developments and deployments a day, and every time was making a copy of their data set in order to test different code. And the ability to do virtual cloning and an instant copy also enables it to be automated. So also the automated testing where it automatically fires up a copy, does the test, shuts it down without any impact at all to your data costs. Yeah. is actually a source of innovation.
Yeah, and the automation itself is key across that as well, because there are so many tools out there which IT has to manage, which application owners, which developers are having to use. They don't want another tool to have to do data management underneath that. They want to be able to API drive if that's where they are. Yeah. And let's face it, with a developer, they are developers. So for them, integration with APIs is a natural way of thinking. And to be able to integrate all of what we've talked about into their process just means that they become that much more agile, to use an overused term, but they move away from that kind of waterfall approach to agile and being able to shift and turn around new releases very fast, which ultimately means the business can react, bring out new applications very quickly.
We're more and more seeing people driving Veeam using external APIs, looking at deployment of Veeam and then control or even the expansion, on-demand expansion of Veeam. But just going back to the data fabric and the use of Veeam, sometimes this is maybe not talked about as much as we should. Veeam is very easy to use. It's a very easy, very nice UI, and it has the ability to leverage the power of the NetApp functionality. But it turns the use of snapshots and backups into almost an IT generalist task. The ability to start the data labs that we've been talking about is able to be delivered by an IT generalist, not necessarily the storage guy, not necessarily by one of the more highly skilled people within the environment. It's taken care of from a right click within the UI. So that really helps that delivering of value from an IT generalist.
Yeah, I think that's really important because we've seen technologies like HCI come about, not because people wanted to buy server, compute, and network all in one kind of box as such, but because they wanted to simplify what they did so they could concentrate on things higher up the stack.
Yeah.
They can concentrate on delivering innovation and growth for their business without having to think about everything else that sits below that. And I think that's really, the real value of what you're talking about, Kevin. That's how that comes together, because it just means the business is more flexible, they're quicker, they're able to respond to requests and demands, and they don't have to think about how that's, well, they have to think about how it's architected initially, but they don't subsequently have to think about how it's delivered. It's fully automated all the way through. Yeah. Makes a big difference.
This is adding to complexity on the one end, but it's also indeed serving a huge benefit. Is this tying together of different software-defined technologies? So you talk about Veeam and NetApp and how they are integrated. You can perform one function and it actually steers both. But we're also seeing that extended to software-defined networking, software-defined security solutions, so that you can create orchestrated workflows where users are requesting, I don't know, a new environment, and it's automatically being, the NetApp is being configured, and the Veeam backup is being configured, and if it's a HCI box, the whole storage, compute, and networking is all pre-configured. Yeah. And ready to go.
Yeah, and we
touch of a button.
It is. I mean, that's what it should be. We see, people are driving now things through Ansible, through Terraform, through through OpenStack, through other kind of infrastructure stacks. They haven't the time or the actually they haven't got the staff and the skills to be able to spend a lot of time trying to drive what sits below into those stacks. So therefore, automation and making it available into the upper layers is absolutely key. Absolutely key.
The other thing that is, I guess, maybe adding to the complexity is that every single organization can define that in their own way. So there isn't a one way to integrate all these technologies. There's multiple ways to do it, and so it enables a whole new toolbox even for IT to develop specific integrations that suit their needs, which might be very different from another, and the flexibility of the tools from NetApp and Veeam, for example, support all those different scenarios.
Yeah, it's kind of the Lego approach, I suppose, in terms of being able to plug things together, but have a much better outcome than just a piece of Lego, or pieces of Lego, which I always stand on the carpet when the kids leave them out. But apart from that, the capabilities are there, and I think that's really important.
So that's brilliant. Thanks for that. That pulled out a whole bunch of different areas where we can help IT create competitive edge for the business. Just want to take time to look at how we also help businesses reduce business cost. A recent IDC report that actually is available on the Veeam.com website highlighted how NetApp and Veeam enable customers to reduce cost by 36% and deliver a compelling 286% ROI and a 9-month payback. So they're pretty impressive numbers in terms of payback on their investment. Can you just highlight some areas and how we enable those cost savings, cost reductions?
Well, I think one of the things you would need to look at in that arena is really maybe the cost of downtime when we're talking about availability.
Yeah.
So the cost of downtime obviously is relatively unique to any particular organisation, whether they be manufacturing, whether they be financial. They would need to understand their own costs there, really. But having that very rapid recovery and an assured recovery, which is quite important, from a blend of the Veeam and NetApp technologies, helping to reduce that unplanned downtime. I think that's something that maybe people don't consider, that unplanned downtime, that when something has gone horribly wrong. Mm-hmm. The businesses that rely on data, they need their data to operate, going to be quite a large cost of downtime, and that's something that both Veeam and NetApp can really help reduce. But alongside that is the cost of management, the management of those environments that are complex. We need to simplify the management of these, and I think Veeam itself really has a very nice, easy to manage overlay on a particular environment around that data protection and NetApp. So I think they're two areas of cost, I think, that Veeam and NetApp can certainly help reduce there.
I could add a few more to that. Well, those are good ones, by the way. But, so one of them, very simply, the cost of storage. Mm-hmm. So when you, storage is in the cloud, it's cheaper, maybe than on-premise, but it's still quite an expensive outlay. And every tool and technology you can use to reduce your data costs are going to be money in the bank for you. So one of the most compelling reasons for using NetApp is the deduplication and compression technology is just better than what you can get natively in an AWS or an Azure at this moment.
No,
so you can save money by using the right tools directly. Also having storage set up in a way where you're putting the data in the right performance for that moment. So more structurally moving archive data to cold storage and hot data to the most highly available. And so you're more right-sizing your data can also reduce costs.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think it's a layer of, kind of value add that sits there from, the ROI which Kevin talked about, which is almost around about speed of RPO and RTO in terms of being able to recover and avoid data outage, if you like, for applications. That's got a huge value, and it's really hard to calculate that, but it's usually in the millions, when you talk to an organization. But then, as you mentioned, Scott, when you come down through the layers, there's then the application of things like storage efficiency technologies, not just on-premise, but doing those in Azure or AWS. Because people don't realize, a terabyte of data in the cloud, you'll be charged a terabyte per month on an ongoing basis. So if you could reduce that by 50%, for example, that's a huge saving in terms of data reduction costs. But the things add up together, and I think it's that agility of NetApp storage efficiency in on-premise and in the cloud, along with the NetApp snapshots and zero-space clones. Then you plug those into the Veeam layer in terms of managing them and providing the capabilities. That just adds up to a huge ROI. I mean, it's something which companies, will find of immense value, I think, in terms of how they use the technologies.
I have another one. So we talked about automation, the ability to deploy virtual machines in seconds rather than, maybe in days in a traditional form. That ability must speed up the value of the new development to the business, which must result in, higher return on investment and certainly less time to do the deployment, but also quicker value.
Yeah, and I see that's one which is not often, I don't think, looked at by business, because we did a while ago for a large company that we automated all of their kind of storage provisioning in the data center, not in the cloud, but we could have done that. The savings they achieved in terms of man hours by automating across all of that was literally months and months of FTE resource in terms of what they saved by having to do that. Automation's a really good one because it's the gift that keeps on giving, because every time you automate, you cut the time to do that task by a factor of 10, for example, and every time that happens, you save. So that's why automating from day one is such a huge requirement, I think, as people look to adopt the hybrid cloud, because if nothing else, just the cost savings and the time savings.
Yeah. Brilliant. So here's savings around management of the data. Here's savings around reduced requirement for capacity here and others. So that's great examples. We're getting to the end of our allotted time. I wondered if you had any closing thoughts, any final messages for the audience out there?
Well, from me, I would say don't think of data protection as an afterthought. Always think data protection at the start of any service, any deployment. Data protection needs to be in the design, protected by design, as we talked about before.
Yeah, was it available by design? You had
available,
it's a new one.
protected. Yeah, I've made some notes. So yeah, that would be my takeaway.
Okay, brilliant.
I actually think, I mean, you're exactly right there. I think it's that journey to adopting a hybrid cloud model. Don't forget that you spent 20, 30 years designing your data center and building your enterprise capabilities, your enterprise protection, building your compliance, your governance, your risk control. Just because you adopt the cloud doesn't mean that you don't have to take all those same requirements into that new environment as well. And I often think that's the biggest mistake a lot of customers make, is they just step into the cloud, they assume everything is delivered and done for them. Whereas in reality, the data protection part is actually not. They're really just offering to not lose your data. You have to bring data protection, you have to bring HA if you need it, synchronous mirroring if you need it, all these technologies between Veeam and NetApp we can deliver. But you have to think about that as you move there, not as an afterthought, because trying to engineer anything afterwards is always a lot more difficult. So that would be my takeaway, really.
Brilliant. Thank you.
I'd like to add one other dimension around this data aspect, and that's that the level and quantity of data is exploding. It's not leveling off. It's not growing at a nice linear rate. It's exponentially growing, and we see more and more companies are seeking more and more data sources. IoT is huge at the moment, and the number of devices that are generating data is growing exponentially, as is not only relying on data sources within your own company, but also outside of the company, and bringing those together to generate these insights, like we talked about. So I think it's harder to predict how much storage and data management capabilities you need for the future, because it's growing so fast. So build in flexibility and agility from the start, as well as protection, of course. But be able to grow at the speed that your business is really growing, and don't tie yourself in to solutions that have a cap on how big they can grow, or
really important. Scalability is the other piece, and I think that's absolutely got to be thought of at the beginning. So.
And just to add to that, complete visibility into any data set will deliver trending information, so you can look at capacity planning and what ifs and what it's going to look like in the future. So that's something that we can deliver together. I thought that was something to add there.
That visibility is a great one indeed. It's one of the big challenges. So once usually you have a limited set of management tools for your on-premise, and when you start moving to SaaS services and PaaS services, multiple EAS, you have this big challenge of how do I get visibility? Now, all of these services have APIs, and so you can get a team of people who are constantly, keeping those APIs up to date and seeing the data. But it's still a terrible challenge to get full visibility across your entire IT estate these days.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where our technologies come together quite nicely, because with the Veeam One product that you've got, with the cloud insights that we've got, we provide kind of an infrastructure view and a data protection view, and the two together, I think, just give customers the best set of capabilities that they've got. So visibility is really important, as you said.
Wow, finish on a high there, Grant. The integration of the two of our solutions. It's like a professional there. So brilliant. So thank you, guys. A really good conversation, really good discussion. Hopefully brought out some really helpful hints and tips and points around for our audience in terms of around reducing cost and also creating competitive edge. So Grant, Scott, Kevin, thank you very much. And to the audience out there, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate you making the effort to get on the webcast. Hope it was of value to you. There'll be a follow-up to the webcast with detail around our digital hub with additional collateral and information to support today's conversation. So thanks very much. Have a good day. Cheers.